Really looking forward to our first fight on the UFC 257 prelims. We have the Prince Amir Albazi taking on Zhako, Zhalgas Zhumagulov. And Matt, this is one of those fights, and we've said it for the longest time with Fight Night Picks, flyweight never die. And listen, you might see it out there on certain sites with Amir Albazi took on a short notice opponent in Malcolm Gordon his first time out. That one was at bantamweight, weighed in at 136 pounds, but usually he is a flyweight, taking on the former Fight Nights global champ in Zhalgas Zhumagulov. And if you have a look at Zhumagulov's run before he made it into the UFC, it was a 5-fight win streak. But really, the last few were very important. Wins over Tyson Am by decision, Tagir Ulanbekov by decision, and Ali Bagautinov. Those are very high-level wins, especially from what we've seen out of Tyson Am in the UFC, from what we've seen out of Tagir Ulanbekov in his UFC debut. He's a close friend of Khabib Nurmagomedov. That was a huge win for Zhalgas Zhumagulov. And then the win over Ali Bagautinov, who had a big win on his own back on the regional scene just last weekend. I can't tell you how excited I was for Kazakhstan Zhalgas Zhumagulov to make his UFC debut. He was coming in against Brazil's Halion Paiva. And just to really set the stage, we've seen a lot of fighters representing Kazakhstan here lately. I know, there's some names that have had better success than others, but Shavkat Rakhmonov, what can be said about his win over Alex Oliveira in his debut? Maria Agapova, yes, she stumbled in her last fight against Shanna Dobson, but she's really looked good. And then the other fighter that we have debuting here shortly, Sergey Morozov, taking on Umar Nurmagomedov. So again, we've seen this kind of, real growth rate out of Kazakhstan with UFC caliber fighters. Zhalgas Zhumagulov, definitely one of those fighters. And in his last fight, it was a loss to Halion Paiva. But if you want to go back and have a look at that fight, I didn't think that he lost that one. I went over to MMA decisions because, again, it was a split decision loss. But if you look at, unanimous decision, all three judges scored at 29-28 for Paiva. Over on MMA decisions, one media member had it 30-27 Paiva. 3 had 29-28 Paiva. 16 had scored at 29-28 for Zhumagulov. And I think we were both in agreement there.
I saw it the same way. He did get out to a bit of a weaker start, but as the fight progressed, you could see him pick up steam. And I don't know if it was a case of octagon jitters, some people like to bring up a lot, but the fact that he did have that slow start and was able to really pick it up as the fight progressed, it's a nice thing to see out of a prospect. Because I feel like we always talk about those hurdles that prospects have to get past. And not that he's an early in his career level prospect, he is 32, but he comes in the UFC, and cardio is the first big thing. How many prospects do we see come over, and they get tired after a round, and everyone's excited, and then it just gets worse and worse? Came in, got better as the fight progressed. And for Albazi, it'll be really interesting to see how he wants to play this fight. If he goes for a lot of takedowns himself, Zhumagulov, and we were talking about this before, he's got this weird thing that he does. When he's on the offensive with his wrestling, he can take down pretty much anyone. He's got good wrestling trips from the clinch. He's got good single legs, good double legs, and he's good at chaining his wrestling together. But on the flip side, Amir Albazi does the same thing with his submissions, and I feel like that's an underrated thing that people don't ever bring up. Daniel Cormier loves to talk about, this is how you chain wrestling if you get someone up against the cage, and his commentary is phenomenal for it. But I don't think the chaining of submissions gets enough respect. I understand how in pursuit of submission, sometimes you will give up position. We saw that with Gilbert Burns against Tyron Woodley. He's in full mount, and he just kind of goes for a triangle choke. Sometimes those Hail Mary moves don't pay off, but for Amir Albazi, he's so crisp on the ground, and he has such a high fundamental understanding, really, of grappling. He can find submissions no matter where he is, and he can find them from really odd angles, too. And I think Zhumagulov really has to watch out if he's the one going for takedowns during this fight.
And these fighters fight in somewhat of a similar style, but there's major and key differences that you have to point out. So for Zhalgas Zhumagulov, when he goes and when he moves in there and starts to flow, it's a lot of 1-2 and then reset. 1-2 and then reset. And then if he's going to wrestle, he's a much more offensive wrestler than he is defensive. Defensively, there are definitely some holes there, and it's pretty tough to point out holes, especially fighters that have made it this far in their career. Again, former promotional champ outside of the UFC. But with Zhalgas Zhumagulov, when he's able to get the takedown, he's normally fishing from guard to side control. He's going to half guard. He's starting to land some blows. He's always trying to be positionally sound when he's on top. He's not really looking for the submissions, and you can see that so far out of the finishes that he has in his career. But Zhalgas Zhumagulov, very good with that offensive pressure, that good top pressure. Whereas Amir Albazi, and you saw it in his last fight, in his his UFC debut, the triangle that he was able to submit Malcolm Gordon with was absolutely insane. And Amir Albazi took on somewhat of a similar test in Malcolm Gordon to Zhalgas Zhumagulov. You've seen Malcolm Gordon's fights. don't look at the UFC ones because, I mean, the loss to Albazi wasn't very good. The loss to Sumaderji definitely wasn't in his favor. That was pretty bad, especially with the stand-up. But Malcolm Gordon on the regional scene, you could see it. Offensive wrestling was there. His submission abilities were there. And on the feet, he was pretty heavy-handed, at least. Especially in the Yoni Sherbatov fight, if you want to go back and see that one. And he even got caught in that one. But for Amir Albazi, always working something. And you saw that on a lot of his regional fights, whether it was with Bellator, whether it was with Brave. And I know he lost that fight against Jose Shorty Torres with Brave, but you really have to go back and watch that fight because it was a lot of back and forth. It was a very, very close fight. It was a unanimous decision win for Torres, but Albazi definitely had his moments in that one, and I think that's more of a loss that you can learn from than anything that you lose stock in.
100%. I agree with that 100%, and we heard that a lot from the commentary yesterday, how, Holloway, he lost to Volkanovski, and he really used that to get better. I think that fight for Albazi was the case. He lost to Torres, and Torres didn't really get enough credit for his UFC run because it wasn't all that great, but him coming into the UFC, he was one of the more hyped up prospects regardless of weight class, and the fact that it was a really hyped up flyweight really means something. Albazi, he takes the L in what was a really back and forth fight, and ever since that we have seen a huge progression in his game. So I love the submission skills of Amir Albazi, but this fight is a very, I'll say, evenly matched, because on the feet, Albazi, I wouldn't say has the power that Zhalgas does. But again, the lack of activity really does worry me. And the longer this fight progresses, I understand he did well against Paiva, but that was because he was able to secure the takedown himself. And I don't really think we're going to be seeing a lot of offensive wrestling from Zhalgas in this fight. We saw what Amir Albazi was able to do against a guy like Malcolm Gordon, who I wouldn't say he does represent a decent mirror, I guess, for Zhalgas. He's just not really as good. And the fact that Amir Albazi was able to finish him so early on in his fight is a really good sign, fighting another similar style to his last one against Gordon. I like Amir Albazi in this fight. I'm not going to lie.
It's a lot of fun if you have a look at this fight. There's a lot of different things that you can try and break down, a lot of different talking points. But if you look at it, this fight was actually supposed to take place once last year, passed over, canceled back in November. Now we have it here in January. If we have a look at the odds, I was a little bit surprised on this one. Albazi opened at -105, just a slight underdog. He's now a plus 102. For Zhalgas Zhumagulov, open to -115, now at a -126. And over on Tapology, it's a limited sample size, but 614 total votes, 81% going Albazi, 65% have him to win by decision. Does any of that surprise you at all?
A little bit, honestly, and I can read the comments already. Oh, Zhalgas coming off a loss and Albazi's coming off a win. That's why you're picking him. We both agree that he probably should have beat Paiva in his last fight. I wouldn't take a lot from that fight just because stylistically they are so different. Albazi's ground game is absurd, though. I really can't stress that. Like, he's got such a unique way of grappling, and it's not that Charles Oliveira is my favorite grappler to watch in MMA because he just floats on top of people and they're moving and they're trying to struggle, and it just seems like nothing ever bothers him. With Albazi, he's the one doing that, but from top position, and just it's an exciting style of grappling to watch.
And I mean, if you look at Amir Albazi, 8 of his total wins are by a first round finish, including his last 2 wins as well. The other thing too, if you want to focus on it, Amir Albazi was actually matched up back in the fall to take on Raulian Paiva that got the win over Zhalgas Zhumagulov. Unfortunately, Paiva had to withdraw from that one. And like I said, the bout between these guys scheduled for November, it was canceled. Now we have it here. Zhalgas Zhumagulov coming out of a good camp out of Arlan MMA Pro Team. Maybe go check out that camp if you get the chance. Tapology's a little wishy-washy. Instagram's probably your best spot to find them. But a lot of really high-level fighters there, including our guy, Zhalgas Zhumagulov. It is a tricky one to try and predict. Again, if Zhumagulov's going to win, you really have to try and string things together on the feet. But it's a little difficult, and I want to focus on it because again, you can't draw a lot of parallels from the main event that we had last weekend between Holloway and Kattar, but the one thing that Max Holloway was never doing, he would never really try and reset. You're always just throwing something. Zhalgas Zhumagulov is one of those fighters, and I mentioned it earlier, he always resets. 1-2 reset. If Albazi's able to go out there on the feet and really try and disrupt the rhythm of Zhumagulov and then try and work the submission abilities, there's a lot of opportunities for him in that fight. So while it is a very close fight on paper, it is a very close fight in terms of the odds, I'm going with the underdog here in Amir Albazi to pick up his second win in the UFC. Overall, both of these guys, great prospects, I guess. You're kind of really starting to pass through that threshold of being a prospect, but both of these guys with good ceilings. I just like Amir Albazi in this one.
I can't disagree with really anything you just said. The only edge that I'll give to Zhalgas is if Amir is kind of forcing the issue, if he isn't able to get the takedown, and if he is just walking into distance, he might walk into a big shot at some point. That's the only thing I'd really worry for Amir Albazi. I do like the overall game of Albazi. I like his ceiling too, and flyweight's in this weird position because there is only about 17 fighters in the whole division, so 1 or 2 wins can really move you up, and I just like Albazi moving forward.
Matt, really looking forward to this fight. We both have Sweden's Amir Albazi to get the win. Overall, a great card, headlined by 2 big-time lightweight fights. Dan Hooker welcoming Michael Chandler to the UFC, and we have the return of the Mac, Conor McGregor taking on Dustin Poirier in the rematch. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it.